James Monroe, the fifth president. So here's some basic presidential info about James Monroe. His administration was for 2 terms from 1817 to 1825. He was a Democrat Republican, just like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson before him. He actually did help negotiate the Louisiana Purchase with Robert Livingston in France and with Napoleon. He was the president during the era of good feelings, where the Democratic Republicans really had no other opposition from the Federalists and any other political party, because those other political parties were just dying in power and influence throughout the country. So the DRs could pretty much get anything passed in Congress and do anything through the executive branch because of the little power of the other parties in Washington. And finally, he helped support the founding of Liberia, which was the first country in Africa founded by former American slaves. And because of his support and because of his encouragement and embrace, the Liberians actually named the capital of their country after him, Monrovia. So domestic affairs under James Monroe. So the Compromise of 1820 was pretty much the largest and most significant domestic affair that went on during Monroe's presidency, and it pretty much regulated slavery in the Western Territories by forbidding the practice of slavery north of the 3630 parallel. Now, the Compromise of 1820, also called the Missouri Compromise, is the first compromise between the North and the South over slavery and over the power of slave states and free states. And this is only this is the first, I believe, of the compromises, as you have the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act that will come up later, that will help nullify the Compromise of 1820. The Compromise of 1820 allowed Maine to become a free state because it wanted to allow Missouri to become a slave state to enter the Union, to keep that equal balance between free and slave states in the United States. And like I mentioned before, because of the Compromise of 1850 and most importantly the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, the Compromise of 1820 was just nullified and repealed because those two acts just contradicted and made the Compromise of 1820 just null and useless. So the general domestic policy of James Monroe. So the Panic of 1819 was a severe depression that hurt the nation economically. He actually vetoed the Cumberland Road, not because it was actually necessary, but because he believed it wasn't the government's job to build it, just like Andrew Jackson vetoed the Maysville Road later, about 2 decades later during his presidency, because he believed it wasn't the president's job to build a national road, it was in the job of the federal government. He actually did send, ironically, Andrew Jackson to Florida to fight the Spanish and the Seminoles, and Jackson was successful and brutally put down the rebellions from the Spanish and the Seminoles, and Jackson actually wasn't censured or condemned by Congress whatsoever, even though he committed mass brutality against the Indians. And finally, the end of the Democratic-Republican Party happened towards the end of the presidency, as during the era of good feelings, the party didn't need to act any unified anymore because they didn't have any opposition. So all the candidates started to drift off to different ideologies and different platforms. And James Monroe is actually the last Democratic-Republican president, as after him, John Quincy Adams is a nationalist Republican, and after that, Andrew Jackson becomes the first Democrat, and then after that, it's between the Democrats and the Whigs. So James Monroe ends up being the last Democratic Republican president. So foreign affairs. So basically, the Monroe Doctrine is the most important foreign affair that happened during Monroe's presidency, actually written by John Quincy Adams, and it stated that the U.S. would see any further attempts by the European powers to colonize any land in the Americas as acts of aggression, as the U.S. wanted to establish itself as a dominant power in the world, so they wanted to restrict European involvement within their side of the hemisphere. The U.S. also promised not to meddle with any states or countries that were already under European control already, like Haiti, which was in control of France, which was controlled by France, and they also promised not to intervene in European affairs. Another extension of the Washington Proclamation of Neutrality, as the U.S. wanted to stay isolated from the European powers and their conflicts and their engagements in Europe. But they also wanted to remain and be recognized as a power that could be reckoned with and would have its own influence in its own region of the world. And like I said before, the Monroe Doctrine established a difference between the new and the old world, as the U.S. let the old world be dominated by the Europe, by the France, the British, the Russians, the Germans, but they wanted to stay as the dominant sphere of influence in the old world, in the new world, and in the Americas. And the Monroe Doctrine was in the future invoked by other presidents, and it was used as the basis for foreign policy by many other presidents, like TR used the Roosevelt Corollary to make sure that the U.S. would intervene in any European engagements in Latin America, and Harry Truman uses the Truman Doctrine as an extension to make sure that any other countries wouldn't fall to communism in all these areas in Eastern Europe. So thank you for watching. This is video number 5, and next video we'll do John Quincy Adams.